Happy Monday and welcome to this week's edition of Sermon Scraps. I'm going to keep reminding you of these books that I talked about yesterday. The first is The New Reformation by Shai Lin. The second one is Talking About Race by Isaac Adams. These are the two that have been really helpful as I have been dialoguing and engaging on this issue. The other one I mentioned this past week was Exclusion and Embrace by Miroslav Volf. He's got some different theology on some other issues, and he has progressively become more leftward leaning in his political ideology. So this book's good, but I wouldn't go read other stuff by him. So this past week we wrapped up the image of God that I broke down into two parts. This week we focused on the relational part, and I talked about the three aspects of the relationship that God originally intended us to fulfill. First is the relationship with God, then the relationship with other people, and finally the relationship with the rest of creation. As I was studying this, I was really struck by how we tend to separate people into various groups. But when Jesus comes, he doesn't really give us that option because he treated every person that he came into contact with as an individual person. So he was never too busy, never too rushed. He never dehumanized or undermined any person. He treated everyone that he met with dignity, honor, and respect. Another aspect or another way that we could have taken this conversation, I read this book that came out last year called Embodied by Dr. Greg Allison. The subtitle is Living as Whole People in a Fractured World. Now, and this is just another application point that we could take the Imago Dei being. The other book that I mentioned again is Theological Anthropology by Mark Cortez. Just another really fascinating foundation point to what it means to be a human. And I think a lot of the modern conversations or trends are trying to separate our bodies from our minds or our consciousness. And so you may have even heard the phrase, we are not bodies, we are souls, we have a body. And that is not what a Christian worldview would allow us to believe. So then you have some questions like, can we upload our consciousness into a computer and thus live forever? Is what makes us human our consciousness? Another book I read talked about is the brain like a machine. I remember hearing that when I was growing up. Think of your brain like a computer, and that's not really true. Instead, we should actually think about your brain more like an organism. It consumes energy. It needs energy in order to live. But then if it is just an organism, where does consciousness fit in? Like, where does this thinking that we have come into these pieces? And I think part of the difficulty for us is admitting that we are bodied people inherently limits us. It places boundaries around what we can do. So because we are in bodies, we are bodied people, we can't be everywhere. We can't be whatever we want to be. We can't do whatever we want to do. And it seems that most people today don't like acknowledging that. I think another piece that along with that, we tend to, as we look at other people, we use our strengths, compare them to someone else's weaknesses, and then use that as a determinative factor to declare them less worthy than us. And if you think about this theologically or even teleologically, that was a new word I taught you yesterday, which is just the end goal, the end purpose. The teleological aim of us being humans is to be embodied people. So Jesus right now is sitting bodily next to the Father. Don't ask me how that works. I don't know, but he is. So for us, if we as humans were to die before Jesus comes home and we would spend a time period separated from our bodies, everything would not be as it is intended to be. We are created to be embodied people. One theologian has said that we don't long for life after death. Instead, what we long for is life after death. I think there's a big and a key distinction here. So what that's saying is even though we will be in the presence of God, there will still be a longing, a desire to be reunited with our bodies as God intended them to be. That's where Paul in 1st or 2nd Corinthians, I don't remember which one of the Corinthians, talks about the fact that if we are separated from our bodies, it'll be like we are naked again. We will not be complete. So at the end of the day, big summary picture is we all have people that we struggle treating as others, whether that be someone with sexual preferences who differ than ours, someone who is politically different than ours, someone who has religious differences. And in talking to a few people, both yesterday, today, I think one of the biggest ones that we struggled with is treating as others is those who differ on the current LGBTQ issues. Now, we'll be studying that a little bit in more detail on Sunday from Romans chapter 1, but this is where we need the foundation foundation of what we've been studying about these past 2 weeks. And that's where that idea of theological anthropology can go so many different directions today. But if we don't have a good theological anthropology, then it's going to set us up for failure in other areas. Now remember, I shared this last week, John Calvin began his Institutes by saying true wisdom has two parts, knowledge of God and knowledge of himself. So in order to understand ourselves, we need to begin with understanding who God is. And if you want to go further into the LGBTQ questions and discussions, Micah is currently doing some reading and studying on this issue, so send questions his way. So with that said, that's the summary of the foundation that we've had. Next week, we're going to be looking at the worldly image from Romans 1. I think Romans 1 is a good description of how the world tries to understand humanity apart from God, and the things that we see taking place in Romans 1 and in our world today shouldn't surprise us. It's people trying to figure out what it means to be human, and they're starting from a flawed foundation. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Don't forget, we have the Community Life Fellowship at 9 o'clock this Sunday, and then we should be having some Texas-sized donuts to celebrate our gathering together afterwards. I look forward to seeing you there.